right, perfect. So, Sarah, David, thank you so much for jumping on this call with me today from the bottom of my heart. Um, you're talking to, even though I'm 47, you're talking to an 18-year-old kid, 19-year-old kid that was surfing Erowid in 1999, 2000, 2001, reading all about all of the psychedelics that were, in the world, and that being the only resource at the time where you could read about someone's trip reports and what their experiences were. And me all the way through that time period, uh, coming to the molecule, experiencing the molecule so many times, experiencing ayahuasca and everything. And here we are today, where I get to ask two giants in the community all the questions I wanted to ask yeah, people like yourselves. So just really quick, there's like a few basic questions that I want to ask you that'll just be questions that other people have asked you, but I would like the information to be here as well. But before we do that, why don't you guys give a short intro about who you are and what you do?
Okay, sure. First of all, I'm not a giant, but I'm standing on the shoulders of giants for
To me,
sure.
you're a giant.
So I'm a writer and researcher. I'm the author of 19 books about the evolution of consciousness, and I have a background in behavioral neuroscience and psychobiology. I studied at New York University and the University of Southern California. And I've worked with MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, for 5 years. And I worked with British biologist Rupert Sheldrake for 5 years, did the research for two of his books, Dogs That Know When Their Owners Are Coming Home, in the sense of being stared at. I've been like you. I like to interview people. I've done 7 books of interviews with people who I consider to be giants, and I've been researching my own mind for as long as I can remember.
Right on. Sarah?
Yeah, I guess in some like non-linear sense, I too am a 19-year-old surfing Erowid in the early 2000s. But yeah, I'm a visionary artist. I went to school at University of California, Santa Cruz. I've been involved in the psychedelic community for the better part of 20 years now. Um, yeah, I've published some work with MAPS. I run a cute little YouTube channel called Dream Seed VR, where I explore psychedelics as well as the dovetailing with ethics and technology and futurism. And yeah, I too explore my mind, and I think that's why David and I are such good friends. Yeah, the world is an interesting place, and we just found ourselves with this like unquenchable curiosity about DMT in particular.
Yeah. Well, um, so today we're going to talk about this book, which to me, you guys wrote a classic. As soon as I got into uh just you guys explaining DMT and how many things I could see that you pulled from. You really did pull from so many places that it's kind of undeniable that this book is like right beside Spirit Molecule and everything like that. And for everybody hereafter that gets to kind of like dive into the genre and find really great information. So the first thing I need to ask you guys is how did the molecule find you and how did you first experience it?
That's a great question. How did the molecule find me? Um, since I've been in high school, I've been interested in psychedelics, and I had, an LSD experience when I was 16 years old that changed my entire view of reality. And I read a lot of books on psychedelics at the time. Of course, Rick Strassman's book hadn't yet been published, but when I was in Santa Cruz in 1983, a friend gave me the opportunity to try DMT, and I had just an astonishing, amazing experience, which I'd be happy to tell you about later. but it was a huge influence on me. And around 2 years after I had that experience, somebody sent me a tape, I think in like 1985, by the late ethnobotanist Terence McKenna. And his description of what I had, what he experienced with DMT was so similar to mine. I was just spellbound. And I think ever since that time, it's been something that I've been just utterly fascinated with. I mean, the experience that I had in 1983, where I broke through into hyperspace and had a mantis entity, rewiring my brain, is just, it's something that I've thought about almost every day since I had that experience. So it was not only a huge influence on my thinking and my what, my perspective on reality, but it was a huge inspiration for why Sarah and I, decades later, did the book that we did together.
Thank you. Sarah?
Yeah, gosh, I have to think about it. I think I was dating a guy when I was about 19 or so, and he was in a band. And I remember going to their band practice and just chilling on the couch and seeing Rick Strassman's book and being familiar with Alex Gray's art anyway, via Tool. I was like, oh, this looks interesting. And so I asked him if I could borrow it. And at that point, I had already been a tripper for a number of years, and I was already good friends with David. And when I read The Spirit Molecule, I couldn't help but just be so fascinated. I think that even though I have an interest in the classic psychedelics, I really feel like the entire reason I ended up tripping on acid was just a stepping stone to see if I could handle intensities to get to the road to DMT. And so, yeah, I spent some time learning about it and just kind of familiarizing myself with the research. A lot of people tend to be afraid of like seeding their imagination with things and then, oh no, if I go into the trip and I read about this, will I see that? And I considered that, but I also, there's just so many different beings that are encountered in Strassman's research that I was like, well, it's kind of just like you know, a dice roll at this point. I don't think that it'll necessarily self-seed it. But yeah, then I started chatting with David about it and just kind of amping myself up because I knew that was going to be a big part of my psychedelic journey in general.
Right on. We actually have a pretty similar path to the molecule. Like I can remember when I was in high school and the second Tool album came out, Anima, and there was, you could kind of tell there was some lyrics in there that were kind of foreshadowing to like them using DMT and stuff like that. And it just became like this very mysterious thing that was so elusive and you never if you came across it, it was like, it was so rare to come across. And then when the Spirit Molecule came out, it was like, wow, there's a book about this now, and you could really dive in, and it was like the ultimate trip report. And I can just remember, like, reading the Spirit Molecule back then, and of course, like, still surfing Erowid and reading the trip reports of people that had had DMT and ayahuasca. And I just thought to myself, like, being from Philadelphia, I was always like, I'm gonna need to go out to like LA to like experience this and everything. And the reason why I said, like, how did the molecule find you is because I truly do believe that years later, the molecule did find me. It was meant for me. And every time someone asks me anything about DMT, my answer is always like, if it's meant for you, it will find you. So, with that being said, how did you guys come up with the idea to create this field guide?
How did we come up with it? Well, the idea originated when Sarah and I were tripping together one day in the Santa Cruz Mountains back in around I think 2012 or 2014, somewhere around then. And we were discussing and reflecting on how consistent it was that so many people reported such similar types of entities during their DMT experiences, and we thought this was quite interesting. Um, and one of us, I can't remember exactly who first thought of it, but it came up on our discussion, and wouldn't it be fun to put together a field guide, kind of in the spirit of the old Golden Guide field guides that I used to love as a child, the guide to reptiles and amphibians, the guide to non-flowering plants and such, and which I used to, as a child, I used to just love to go through the different species in the book and try to identify them when I was out in nature. And we thought, wouldn't it be a fun thing to do to put together a book where, Sara, being just the brilliant artist that she is, could illustrate the different entities, as different species, and I could write descriptions of them. And that was really the genesis for how we came up with the idea behind the book. We sort of sat on the idea, let it percolate for a couple of years, and during that time, what was really fascinating was how popular DMT became. Like you said, it was very rare for people to be able to experience it. It wasn't something that was well known, even in the psychedelic community. Most people in those days really didn't even have experience with it, let alone really know what it was. And during that time, partially due to Rick Strassman's research and the internet filled up with and I guess people like Alex Gray, started spreading ideas about it, and it sort of became so well known in the internet, where hundreds of reports started popping up, and uh, and as it became more and more and more popular. Um, we thought, now is really the time to put together that book that we thought about doing. And so a couple of years ago, we actually started researching it, and Sarah started doing the illustrations, and I started interviewing people for it. We got not only the reports from the internet, but we also interviewed leading scientific researchers like Rick Strassman, Andrew Gallimore, and David Luke for the collection. We interviewed some of the people in the extended state DMT studies that are going on in Imperial College, which we can discuss more later. And we also tried to tie it in with the alien abduction phenomena and the UFO contactee reports and fairy sightings that have been going on for centuries, because we saw an interesting overlap in the types of entities that people report, such as the gray aliens or the mantis entities or the reptilians or fairies or gnomes, which are commonly reported in many types of experiences, and not just the DMT entity contact reports. So that was the genesis for the book, and then we got a contract from Intertraditions, and we spent a year working together on the project, and then another year editing it, and going back and forth with our editors in Intertradition, and finally it came to fruition.
Right on. Sarah, anything?
Yeah, gosh, it was a long road to get to producing the book because it's just such a overwhelming task to illustrate, more than 25 faithful illustrations to these hyperdimensional entities. You could spend a lifetime painting them. Um, but yeah, it was really when I noticed a lot of the AI image generation stuff happening in, gosh, I think it was 2022. And that's when I realized that there could be a pipeline that could facilitate us generating these images. But not only that, being able to tailor the prompts from people's direct trip reports and from the aggregate of these experiences that David had been researching and collecting for all those years. So that was really exciting to just realize that this technology could be kind of a window into the collective consciousness and kind of see a new perspective on this like shared mythos, this shared cartography that we experience when we go to hyperspace.
It's funny. You guys answered my next question, which was how did you go about researching all of this? Because I could see that there was things pulled from um, like very esoteric places. Even if you've surfed in the ceremonial magic spectrum, there's things pulled from there. There's things pulled from the alien abduction or the UFO UAP genre. And, as I was reading this book, I was just like, man, they really, really covered everything. And that's why I thought it was that's why I think it's so brilliant. It's like such a classic because it's like, yeah, you can go look here, there, and everything, but there's actually one place where like you find all the rivers come into this one ocean in this one book, and it kind of, puts a nice bow on it. Like here we are, here it all is. Um,
Yeah, let me just say, I think that that leads some credibility to the notion that there really is an independent reality or an independent existence to these beings. The fact that people report them not only, because one of the biggest criticisms, especially from people who have never had a DMT experience, is that, oh, this is just, some mental projection, a hallucination that you're experiencing from a hallucinogenic drug. Of course, you're going to see things that aren't there, and how ridiculous it is that people think that there's, a reality to these. But, people have these cultural contact experiences with some, the same beings, um, you know, just, completely sober. So I think that the fact that people have reported such similar types of entities from this wide spectrum of types of experiences, I think that gives a greater credibility to the possible reality of these beings, and whether they truly exist or not is a mystery. We don't know, but we really don't have a measure for consciousness, so we really don't. We may never know the answer to that question. But I think it is very compelling and very interesting evidence that these types of beings turn up in so many different types of scenarios.
I couldn't agree more. These are conversations that need to be had, because it's funny that you say people just automatically say, "Oh, it's a hallucination of your mind," and to people like that, it's usually somebody who's never experienced it. And I always say it's like, well, you've seen pictures of the beach and the ocean and mountains and everything, but it's another thing to walk on the beach and feel the sand beneath your toes and the breeze of the ocean and the smell of the ocean. That's how you know what the beach is, versus you can read all about the beach and you can look at pictures, but you could never truly know the visceral feeling of the beach, So it's really hard for people to, with, whatever model they know, um, these experiences blow apart those conventional models,
Yeah,
and that
yeah,
can blow apart somebody's identity and paradigm in general of how they view reality. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, the people who have had the experience, you don't walk away from this experience and say, oh, that was just, a dream like, the absolute vividness, the intensity, the realer than real feeling that people bring away from it is just, it's just completely, makes you question your reality because there's such a intense vividness and sense of reality to the experience that it just does not feel like a hallucination in any way.
right, you said on another podcast where psychedelics are like one of the things that can change your perspective and reality overnight. And I feel like dimethyltryptamine and ayahuasca are the ones that can completely change your entire idea of who you are, what reality is, and who we are as a species in an instant.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think I said it was kind of like Scrooge in the Christmas Carol was the way I
Yeah,
refer to it. And why I think that's so important is not just in terms of the entity contact experience like we're discussing, but in terms of the ecological awareness that it raises that many psychedelics like ayahuasca and magic mushrooms can bring about, and why I think that's so important at this particular juncture in history because we're facing this, huge crisis ecologically right now. And like you said, there's just nothing else that turns somebody around overnight like a powerful psychedelic experience.
agreed. Sarah, anything to add to that?
Gosh, I mean, I think that David said it really well. I have a hard time imagining somebody who's had a powerful psychedelic experience that wasn't moved really deeply, and I feel like Psychedelics definitely aren't for everybody, but I definitely think that we're at a unique point in history where a lot of the people who are capable of making that journey are sort of being called to and to share the things they learn, regardless if other people are imbibing in that medicine. So the medicine goes beyond the visionary experience. And I think that it really imbues itself in the culture that we embody. So it's been really exciting to sort of see that as we move towards, these great changes that we're being equipped with these perspectives that the plants share with us.
You're right. Like the medicine absolutely does go far beyond the visionary experience, and it goes into the actions and the integration afterwards. How does it actually affect you afterwards? How do you show up in the world to make it better after having these experiences and try and improve the quality of the life around you? Well, and that being said, what are some of the entities and experiences that you guys have personally had in the DMT realm? Because, um, like I said in my review, I felt validated with the mention of the octopus beings and the purple-hued beings and the jesters. Having these conversations in the late 2000s and 2010, 2011, 2012, where people weren't, they just didn't know. I seemed completely insane. And I was just like, well, at some point you guys will know this, and now, a decade and a half later, uh, the, uh, the term DMT is kind of like a buzzword of in certain circles now. And it's a very big talking point. But yeah, what have you guys come up with? Or what are um, common characters that have made appearances and reappearances in your experiences?
Yeah. Well, the experience that I described having in 1983 when I first got my first experience with DMT, I found myself after three large tokes of this foul tasting chemical burning substance. I found myself, sort of break through into a membrane, or through a membrane rather, where I was suddenly in this hyperspatial reality where there was a kind of technology, some kind of futuristic technology all around me, and I was able to see in 360 degrees. And within a few seconds, a being there took notice of me, and this being was a giant mantis creature of some kind, like a giant praying mantis. It seemed slightly larger than a human being, maybe around 7 feet tall, and kind of hovered above me. It had multiple appendages, and was it began immediately trying to not only restrain my movements and pin me down, but it began to operate or to do something to my brain. It was experimenting on me and testing me in different kinds of ways. It was asking me, over and over again, like this, like this, like this, as it was sort of infusing these intense energies into me and measuring the threshold levels at which I was able to experience it. And the probably the strangest thing about this particular being was that when I looked up into its face, even though it had the body of a praying mantis, it had my face on it. It was my own face. And I really thought about that experience a lot after I had it, and and I was doing research at the time at New York University, neuroscience research, where I was experimenting on little laboratory animals like rodents and rabbits, and I couldn't help thinking after the experience was over that the entity was trying to show me what it was like from the animal's perspective to be the laboratory animal being experimented on. And this really changed my perspective in terms of my own research that I was doing. In subsequent experiences with DMT, have also had experience with octopoid type beings and with mischievous elf type beings, with clowns and jesters, and goddess like entities, or some of the other beings that I've personally had contact with.
Right on. Sarah?
Yeah, I've met octopoid entities and goddesses and clowns and self-transforming machine elves. Yeah, it's just so many over the years. It's hard to keep track of them all, but I've definitely met quite a few of the different entities represented in the book.
Yeah, you mentioned some in the book that were really I've never heard anybody come across Jesus Christ in a DMT trip, which I thought was really thought-provoking, you know? Can you
Yeah.
speak to that a little bit? Where did you find uh trip reports of that?
Oh yeah, well, I found those on the internet largely.
Okay.
I didn't speak to one person who had an experience like that. Um, yeah, that is interesting. I mean, I think those kind of experiences primarily happen to people with strong Christian upbringing or a strong
Hmm.
Christian background. Um, it's not just Jesus, but also the Virgin Mary, and also Hindu deities and Egyptian deities, and you know different gods and goddesses from different world religions turn up in many people's contact experiences on DMT. It's really hard to say, what level of reality this is, and whether or not the entities can sort of cloak themselves in a kind of avatar, the same way when we go into virtual reality. We can sort of choose the avatar that we like to see ourselves represented as. And I sort of suspect that the entities have this ability to sort of wear an avatar that or control the way that we see them. I think that they're immensely more intelligent than us, and are able to the inside of our minds are completely transparent to them. I mean, that's the thing that you really take away from this, is that there's nothing you can hide from these entities, and they understand you better than you understand yourself. So I think that sometimes they may appear to people as, as Jesus or the Virgin Mary, as a way of resonating with the type of expectation, or the best way to communicate with them might be.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that because it brings up this little conversation about do you know the movie Contact with Jodie Foster?
Oh, sure.
And the
It's based on Carl Sagan's book. It's such a
okay,
wonderful movie.
great movie. And so many people have said, the scene where she goes through dimensions and she ends up on the beach and everything is they're basically simulating like a dimethyltryptamine trip, and where her father, he says to her like, we showed up in this form because this would be easy for you.
Right.
And it kind of speaks to that whole thing is like, well, these spirit guides show up in all kinds of forms, and it's funny like when uh when we read things in or when people read things in New Age writings and things like that are pretty campy and stuff. And it's just like, well, contact your spirit guides and this and that. And I always think to myself, like, if you were to have some DMT and go into the spirit world, you would be really surprised at what your spirit guides may look like. You know?
Yeah, it's true. I mean, because even though we identified 25 commonly reported entities, there's still, I mean, people actually reported hundreds of different types. I mean, some people see, entities made up of sunflower seeds, or like, of like or of other types of mythological characters turn up. So there's a wide spectrum, and it's not uncommon that people encounter, dead relatives, or dead friends, but the ancestor spirits, is a from the ayahuasca reports, are extremely common. In fact, that's what the word ayahuasca means, is the vine of the dead, and the way it's been used by the indigenous people in the Amazon for hundreds or thousands of years, as a way to contact not only plant and animal spirits, but the ancestor entities, or the ancestor spirits that of people that came before them.
It's interesting you bring up trip reports of people meeting, dead family members and dead relatives and stuff like that. Because now we're into some bonus round questions, but I'll bring them up now. One of the things I always thought was very interesting about the near-death experience space and the DMT space was they seemed so different. People that would have a near-death experience, like they died, they, were resuscitated and they came back, seemed to have such different, they would bring back different things. It's like they would commonly bring back dead family members, relatives, or almost like some sort of angel or a spirit god or something like that. Whereas the DMT realm, it's just like, oh, I brought back jesters and I brought back like a self-transforming machine elf. And it's just always been strange to me. It's just like, well, if dimethyltryptamine is the chemical that gets released when the brain is in a dying state, why wouldn't somebody see why are the two so different? And it's been a
Yeah.
hard question for me to answer or to find answers for. Is there anything you'd speak to on that besides trip
Yeah,
reports?
I've thought about that same interesting paradox myself because it's not just that they're different, they're also similar in many ways. There's a lot of overlap. People feel like they leave their body, people feel like they're contacting other types of entities that share, life reviews with them and things about their life that they things that they need to improve on in their life, when they come back. So there is interesting overlap. I think probably, one of the biggest distinctions between it is that when people have a near-death experience, it's often described as, very euphoric and blissful, and whereas a DMT experience is usually pretty jolting and sometimes even terrifying,
Hmm.
and that's rarely reported in the near-death experience phenomena. And I think probably I think there is a lot of interesting evidence that DMT is released in the brain, during a near-death experience that we know from laboratory studies with rats. That when they go into cardiac arrest, that their brains, undoubtedly, release an enormous amount of DMT, and that leads credence to the idea that we do as well. I think probably what it, my theory as to what explains this paradox is that DMT is not the only chemical that's released. I think there's something kind of like an endogenous ketamine-like chemical that's also reduced because there's a lot of interesting overlap between the ketamine experience and the near-death experience. And most people describe their ketamine experiences as being, quite euphoric. So I think that there's probably more than one neurotransmitter or chemical released in the brain during a near-death experience or an actual death experience, and I think that's why so many people report it as being a more pleasant journey than the pure DMT experience.
Hmm. No, it's I'm still searching for that one. It's mind-boggling, but it's there all the time for me. So, but thank you for answering that. Sarah, I have a question for you. I've heard you talk about you kind of have um, a Gnostic perspective about some things in reality, and
Mhm.
whereas being someone who myself who's read and practiced a lot of ceremonial magic and things of that nature, Gnosticism shows up a bunch in that end.
Mhm.
Um, since you've had all of these experiences, and I've heard you both explain your experiences with ayahuasca and pharmahuasca, and I've had ayahuasca and pharmahuasca myself,
Mhm.
and had some profound experiences in that realm as well. Do you still have this Gnostic perspective of, say, like demiurge archons and everything inside of what you've experienced so far with coming in contact with these entities and whatnot, or does it speak even more truth to that?
I don't think they're mutually exclusive at all. I don't think that the phenomenon that I've experienced in any way like negates that particular interpretation. I would love to be wrong. I don't want to be Gnostic. Who wants to be Gnostic? Come
Right,
on,
right, right,
really?
right. Yes,
Like
yes.
who wants to be trapped in a loosh farm? Like
Right.
nobody. But there on some level, of course, there's going to be like a little bit of existential comfort that comes from having experiences that are novel and like outside of this 3D construct, because then it gives you this sense of like, okay, well, there's more, right? And
Hmm.
that is a very like cathartic, uplifting possibility. But it also just makes the universe a much bigger place. And so it brings in more questions and more, I don't want to say like existential doubt, but potentially that. I think that there is so much beauty in creation. A lot of Gnostics will tend to think of the universe as like a flawed place and
Hmm.
just like irredeemable. And I think that's nonsense. I think any kind of beauty that we find in creation, even if this is a truncated, flawed creation or a limited uh, expression of the pleroma, I think that any of the beauty that we experience is from that transcendent realm. And so I find a lot of like peace in that there is that thread that kind of leads outside of 3D reality. Um, but if anything, it's made me question more. Like a lot of people will hypothesize that um, that these hyperdimensional entities are aeons, or that they are. For people who don't know what an aeon is, it's basically a neutral word that refers to what people would call like an angel or a demon, an archon. So aeon is like a more neutral and or positive aspect of that understanding. But yeah, I wonder if they're aeons. I wonder if, as David is saying, that they put on different outfits for us to see, for us to perceive, because any kind of being that's that sophisticated is going to have, an advantage on your perception and be able to manipulate it potentially. And so I always have to take my perception with a grain of salt when I'm out there, even if it is feeling hyper real or more real than real. I have to understand that my perception is limited, my interpretation is limited. And so oftentimes I think that when people use these little word tags, be like, it was like this, it was like that, those are approximations and they're very useful when we sort of compare them to one another. But I think ultimately the question is for us to sort of like ask, when we get beyond those word tags, what do those qualities mean? What do they imbue? What do they represent? Like, is it functional? Is it ornamental? Is it just symbolic? Is it, an energetic anatomy of these entities that we're just interpreting in a way because we're seeing certain shapes and dynamics in the visual field? So, yeah, I think, despite me wanting mushrooms to be like a one-stop shop to let go of Gnosticism, I think that it's only really made it a more compelling exploration. But I also think that one of the gifts of Gnosticism is that we have a connection to wisdom that is outside of what's prescribed to us by society. So outside of dogma and systems. And um, I think that there's a lot of mercy and grace in allowing those brave enough to think for themselves. Because, like I said, it's hard to face those existential things, but ultimately, like the euphoria, the beauty, the mystery, those are the things that make me feel strong enough to deal with living a Gnostic perspective in this life.
I agree. 100%. Are you familiar with the book Alien Interview?
No, it sounds awesome though. That sounds really cool.
Well, I think you would very much enjoy that book.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Oh,
Bec
I wanted to mention this to keep that thought.
yes.
Have you heard of the guy who thinks that clowns are Nephilim?
No. Do tell.
You should you should check him out. I think it's called Understanding Conspiracy. Full disclosure, I think he's a nut job. I don't care if he hears this.
Okay.
Buddy,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
we've hashed it out in YouTube comments, and I think he's a nutcase. But it's a very interesting perspective and argument.
Y-
And he thinks that throughout culture, clowns are representations of this Nephilim experience that we had. And I thought it was interesting because clowns are such a strong archetype within DMT. And then it goes back to like, are these hyperdimensional beings aeons? And it's a whole thing, but I wanted to bring it up in case you or your listeners might be curious about it. But tell me about this alien interview.
Number one, I am curious about that, and I am definitely going to put a note to that to look up guy who thinks clowns are Nephilim. So thank you for that.
You're
Appreciate that.
welcome.
I love tidbits like that. That's why I do this show. Um, so the book Alien Interview is to sum it up, um, a woman who was a flight nurse for the Air Force that was present during the Roswell crash, where they retrieved four extraterrestrial bodies. It's her diaries of what took place, and towards the end of her life, she mailed it to uh, a science fiction author, essentially. And the science fiction author prefaces in the beginning of the book, like, I have no way to prove this, but I'm going to tell you how this happened. But the only thing I can say is you have to look at it like fiction because I have no way to prove that this is true. But he does research names that were present at that time in those positions, and they check out. So, very interesting book. Basically, what happens in the book is they retrieve four bodies. Three have no signs of life, and this fourth has signs of life. And what they discover is like the body is kind of like um, does it has a completely electrical central nervous system. It doesn't have a mouth, so it can't talk, but and it they can't communicate with it. But this nurse starts getting while she's around it starts getting mental images of stuff. So she starts to say like, I think this thing is communicating with me telepathically. So that's basically what happens. Like this thing starts communicating with her telepathically. Um, and then they say like, okay, well, we need to have something that we meet up with that has better communication because the images that you're giving me are kind of they're open for interpretation. So they give the being um basically like English like that like language books from like the late 1800s, how they were like teaching children language and so on and so forth, some history books and some philosophy books and all this stuff, and it doesn't sleep, so it just stays up and like reads everything, and shortly thereafter um it can communicate through language, through like sending like telepathic thoughts in the form of like the English language. So it goes on to say like, listen, I'm projecting my consciousness into this life form. This life form is not me, but my consciousness, I'm just projecting my consciousness into it so it looks like it's animated there, but I am actually someplace else. So it starts to tell this lady kind of the story of Earth and why Earth is like this kind of almost piece of real estate. And I don't want to ruin it for you, but um, in terms of like looking at it from a Gnostic point of view, it is very, very interesting. And
Cool. Thank you.
I'll leave it at that. You can blast. I think the audiobook's 12 hours.
Oh.
I I was actually glad that well, I knew I was like, there's no way to put this in audio because the art it's worth it for the artwork alone. But
Hmm.
like I there's always an audio book on deck for me. So I devour audiobooks. Just like I devoured David's other book, Dreaming Wide Awake, this past week. But so in terms of like the Gnostic perspective and all that, are either of you famous or familiar with like famous channelers and so on there and so forth? Like Bashar, David or Daryl Anka, and the guy who does Cryon and all those people. Are you familiar with them?
I'm
I'm from,
really I'm really not. I think Sarah is though. Let Sarah
I'm
speak. I'm
I'm
sorry.
somewhat familiar with them. I tend to take, I'm like a professional hardcore skeptic. Um, Even though I do obviously make concessions for certain things in my life, I tend to come in wanting as much data as possible before I make an assessment, but I tend to default to like it's got to prove itself. But I will say that the one channeler that really impacted me on a level that felt like it went beyond just like a intellectual analysis was Barbara Marciniak
Mm,
and her book. What is it? Bringers of the Dawn.
mm.
It's from the 90s. It's
Mm.
a much earlier channeling thing. I also read a little bit of, gosh, you would know what I'm talking about, David. Jane Roberts, is that
Yeah,
her
that's what
name?
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
just
Yeah,
I was just going to bring her up. Yeah, the Jane Roberts and the Seth Speaks books, I think, are
yeah,
very, very interesting. Yeah.
Yes,
yes,
they
yeah.
are. They are very interesting. And thank God for audiobooks now because stuff like that you can just you can devour those books while you're doing A, B, and C while you're like shopping for groceries now. And they're very thought-provoking, especially for like the time period that they were in.
Hmm.
It's like I don't feel like people were ready to hear that information back then. And now it's like, oh, this is palatable, right? Um, but
Yeah,
what I was
yeah.
gonna
I'm sorry. Yeah, yeah. I did. I read a lot of Jane Roberts and her Seth Speaks books, and they're truly remarkable. Really, really, really fascinating information in those books.
Yeah, no, I highly recommend them to anybody who watches this. There's gold in those books. But I was gonna say, with me researching, everything ayahuasca and DMT and alien and or UFO experience and UAP experience, I kind of I spent a lot of time listening to different channelers because if I'm gonna uh, try and get information about that, well then let's see what intelligences from somewhere else are projecting themselves down through a human and speaking this knowledge and this information. And every so often, especially in Daryl Anka sessions in workshops that he has, someone brings up a DMT question, and it's just like I was waiting for this. Um, and he has some very interesting things to say about dimethyltryptamine in general. But um, the most interesting thing that he has said thus far, recently, not too long ago, was that, and I have to preface this by saying that, and if you're familiar with UAP and UFO territory, seems like 2026, 2027 are very big years where something very big is supposed to happen, a big shift, a big change, more knowledge of extraterrestrials and so on and so forth. But what Daryl Anka says in one of these sessions, or I should say Bashar says, is someone asks what is the best way to prepare for um, contact with extraterrestrials? And he says this is a very unconventional way, but the best way to prepare for contact with extraterrestrials, because what happens with contact with extraterrestrials is your frequency rises so much that it brings up all of your subconscious fears to the surface and it feels like you're dying. So the best way to prepare for contact with alien life is to try DMT, which I thought was so funny. It's like,
Yeah,
wow,
yeah.
you know. Um, but at the same time, like he has touched on a lot of uh the talking points of like we don't live in a prison planet. We never have anything like that. Actually, we don't live in a simulation. You are projecting yourself down into a collective simulation that you're able to have the experience of change in because you are this infinite being that is in spirit and you will always be in spirit. You're just temporarily like, projecting yourself down into a collective thing, so to speak. Um, but that being said, Uh, I wanted to kind of ask with, well, let me say this. I know that Sarah, you're on some kind of committee, council, board with Andrew Gallimore. Did I get that right? Right. So you guys have both mentioned, the extended, um, the studies for the extended DMT state happening.
Mhm.
Um, is there anything that you can speak to within that that maybe didn't show up, that you weren't able to put inside your book?
I'm trying to remember how far we got into discussing that in the book because I've been following it very closely since then. Um, for those people who don't know, I mean, the DMT experience, I mean, DMT is metabolized very quickly in the body. So when you ingest it through vaporization, you generally only experience for, maybe 10 minutes or 15 minutes or so. And what they're doing is through, intravenous infusions, they're putting people into this state, for extended periods of time, for 30 minutes, for an hour, or, potentially for hours at a time. And, and I think that some of the latest developments in that is that they're now putting people out in teams. They're putting people out together at the same time to see if they can actually link up in hyperspace and share the experience together, so that there's a greater sense of objectivity to these types of experience. Um, Another recent development, I think, is that I'm not sure if we mentioned this in the book or not, but at the Medicinal Mindfulness Research Institute in Denver, where they're also doing extended state research studies, they've actually gotten information back from the entities on how to improve their DMT infusion protocol. Kind of like in when you were talking before about Carl Sagan's contact, how the extraterrestrials actually sent back instructions for how to build this type of communication device. This is actually happening as we speak, where they're getting information back from the entities on how to improve the actual DMT infusion research. So I think that's another fascinating development. I interviewed Carl Hayden Smith and Alexander Beiner for the book, who were both subjects in the DMT study, and they talked about extended state contact with some of these entities. But they're continuing to do they're doing brain scan studies to see what areas of the brain are being accessed and stimulated during the DMT experience. And I truly think this is some of the most exciting scientific research, not only going on now, but maybe in all of human history. Because we're truly establishing what I think to be a contact with genuine, more highly evolved beings.
I agree. It is very exciting. It's that's why we're having this conversation. It's the thing that has kind of driven me towards answers. I always looked at dimethyltryptamine and ayahuasca just from my own experiences as, um, where I was able to get the most answers to the questions that I had. And also, it things that I read in other esoteric work, it was like made way more sense because of those experiences. And I couldn't agree more that this is kind of the most exciting thing that could be researched, because it's like it gives us some sort of answer as like who we are, why we are, and um, why do we keep going? You know?
Yeah, yeah, and who knows what type of information we'll be able to bring back through these extended state, contact experiences. Are we going to be able to make new scientific developments? New fields of science could develop? Are we going to be able to bring back, engineering plans for creating new types of technologies, new types of matter transporters, time machines, starships? I mean, it's really mind-boggling to think about, communicating with actual entities that are, hundreds or thousands of years more evolved than us.
Right, right. And I in one of the other podcasts that you're on, you were talking about just kind of being in that state where the same thing that I experienced. It was kind of like once you're plugged into the cloud of all knowledge that is, and before you're even done asking the question mentally, it's like you have the answer. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like why are we not utilizing this more for answers to have a better life as the human race? So that's why I think it's the most important area of research. Um, Sarah, uh, as far the name of the count, it escapes me right now. It starts with an N. The one that you're on with Andrew Gallimore.
Oh, Pneumatics.
Pneumatics.
Yeah.
There it is. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, do you have anything to add to that with, being on kind of the inside loop of that whole study?
Um, they're really just like moving kind of slow right now, to be quite honest. And when I say slow, I really just mean methodically and
Hmm.
slowly.
Yeah.
There's going to be some research. They're really just like trying to design a new set and setting for this kind of research and take it out of a clinical setting and more into a therapeutic, more like cultural kind of format where you're not so oppressed by, white QB walls of medical institutions, and you're more in like a retreat type environment with nature. And so just figuring out the legal logistics as well as, the logistics of how to facilitate that. Um, at a specific location. They've been working on that, which is really cool. But one of the reasons they brought me on, and um, we haven't quite gotten to this end yet, but they have a deep-seated interest in how to create better protocol for people coming out of the experience to integrate. Like, how do they describe the experience? How do they collect information and data about it? How do we interpret these things? And in turn, like, how do we perceive them, beyond just a data set? How do we really like develop a body of knowledge that is a little bit more intuitive and can tap into the things that they might be trying to communicate outside of, what we document as just brain waves and stuff like that. So they're really looking for like a good subjective, um, how do I say, like lexicon, of how to interpret and bring back the data.
Something I wanted to ask you was, since you have experience in the VR space, do you think we'll hit a point where we could simulate the experience in VR before actually having like the real experience for someone? You
No,
think? No.
no. Why do I say that? Because as of right now, VR is a visual experience. It's not a biochemical experience. And even if we get to the point where we are doing, like, say, direct brain stimulation, I still think that that's facsimile compared to it's kind of like reading the book about the beach.
Right.
You're not actually at the beach.
Right.
You might get an idea of what the beach is like. You might be able to be like, "Oh, well, I've stood in sand. I know what sand feels like," but you don't know what the smell is like.
Hmm.
Are we going to smell DMT when we put the DMT VR headset on? There's a guy named Zeus Tapato who's doing some really interesting research in the Netherlands, doing brain scan stuff on people on DMT. And then I personally think, and I will say he has not denied or verified it. I think he hasn't denied it because I'm right. Semi-psychic. Sorry, guys. He is. essentially going to take that brain imaging data and then try to reverse engineer it into brain stimulation stuff and then bring that into VR as well. And so while I think that that would be a cool facsimile, I don't ever think it's going to be a one-to-one. I think that there's just too much nuance in the evolutionary legacy of these biomolecules that it's something that I don't think we'll be able to replicate. Um, but I do think we're going to get to the point where we will essentially be able to take a visual snapshot of the experience and translate that faithfully. But that's completely different. You know, it has some similar hallmarks. It's kind of like looking out a window at a thing, but it's not actually being immersed in it. Um, so yeah, in the same way that I think visionary art has served as a vehicle to be that window for people who haven't ever had that experience, um, I think that in the way you're talking about the magic of the molecule finding people, that there's just some kind of quantum field thing that you're not really going to be able to replicate technologically. But there's a really cool anime back in the day called Paprika that centers around this technology where people are able to record dreams and share dreams. And I definitely do think that we're closing in on the capacity to do that with visionary states. We've already had a lot of research come out of both Russia about 10 years ago and then Facebook about 2 or 3 years ago, where they've been able to use machine learning to interpret the visual cortex information. I think that same thing is going to be applicable to visionary states as well as dream states.
Mhm.
So I'm excited about that. I think that that's going to be a huge cultural boon to us relating the ineffability, but I think there's no replacement for that quantum biological relationship.
I agree because yeah, so many people have asked like what's like, and it's like, well, how do you describe the ineffable? Like
Hmm.
there's the English language doesn't hold. I can try my best to use the English language to describe visually what's happening, but it's not, it's there's just no way that I could, sum it up for you. And the only way to actually understand is to have the experience. But I thought that maybe, like you said, like maybe we can get a snapshot of,
We would need some smell-o-vision
right.
involved too.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, just to do justice to that overwhelming burnt sneaker smell.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And the
And
closest,
let me just also add it.
yeah, go for it.
It's not just a it's not just a visual experience that we're trying to recapture. I mean, the entity contact, interaction is something that I don't think could be replicated through VR or really replicated in any way because it's something that's unique every time, and the entities are able to sort of telepathically communicate with you and I'm not sure it's, in VR, I think we can come pretty close to being able to replicate the visual aspect of the experience, but the actual visceral interaction with these entities, I think, is something that would be impossible to really replicate.
Visceral is the exact word that people have to understand about the experience because um, it is a very physical, visceral experience that you feel sensations that you've never felt before. It's almost like I, I say that DMT lets you know that you're in a body for the first time. Like you actually get the feeling that you're operating a meat suit. And then you know it after that. You understand that like your brain is a receiver after that, and it's not necessarily the projector. Um, but let's see. I was trying to see if I have. We kind of covered all of the questions that I wanted to ask you guys, except I'll ask you guys one more question. Have you ever experienced being locked out of the realm?
I personally haven't, but I'm so fascinated by reports of that because that is really interesting. I have spoken to quite a few people who have had that experience. I have a close friend who was doing DMT every day and then did experience that experience of being locked out. And I think that leads greater evidence to the reality of this experience, because it's not like people build up a slow tolerance to it and they need more of it to be able to break through. It's an abrupt, shutting off of the experience. People who have had it, I've heard, they actually just experience a red X, for example, when they try to go back in and they're not allowed back in for a certain period of time. Um, so I think that is really profound evidence that there is a reality to these beings saying, look, don't take this lightly. This is not something, that you should do frivolously. If you're going to keep coming back every day, we're gonna lock you out.
Mhm.
But I haven't personally had that experience because I've never used DMT that regularly, or I think in any of the ways that would bring that on. But I think it's very, very interesting. Have you had the experience?
Yes,
Mm.
it was a long time ago. It was back in 2011. It was basically it was the week of my birthday, and it was like the mid-November, beginning of November, and I was gonna use every day. I was gonna, break through every day leading up to my birthday. And a day short of my birthday, and I broke through every day. A day short of my birthday, um, it was basically not letting me get past a certain point. And I pretty much had, I had a similar amount every day. I had a pretty good measuring method. But I was not able to get past a certain, it was almost like there was a blockade there. And the last day that I was in the space before that, I kind of got the impression, or I had the feeling like, don't come back here until you gathered some more. And it's almost like, don't come back here until you've gathered some more experience, some more life to like dump off here, I guess you could say. I've always kind of felt like every time I go into the DMT space, I'm filling up my Akashic jar, we'll say. Like I'm dumping like life experience into, the grand total of life experience. And the way that I came to that conclusion was back in 2018. I was going through, it was the summer of 2018. I was going through a pretty intense time where I had just, days before, like I had just held my uncle's hand in the hospital while he was passing. Uh, and he passed from a very intense form of cancer. And basically, the only thing they could do to him was like put him to sleep and like let him coast off. But it took about a week for it to happen. And the only thing I could think of is like, where's his consciousness right now? Like, is it here, or is he in between here and there? Like, I'm just so curious, like where he's at right now. Like knowing what I know from near death experiences and the DMT realm and everything like that. So, I was having a lot of trouble at work, and there was just a lot of intense things happening. And I remember one day it was like everything had built up so much that I just felt like I was going to explode. And I'm not a suicidal person by any stance, but I felt like I was just like, I do not want to live right now at all. And uh, I knew that the one thing that I could do that could like relieve the pressure or the buildup was to go to the realm. And it was it was a very profound experience that day, because what it felt like was the everything that I was experiencing at that time was removed from me in a way that it was like, this part of your lesson is done. You don't have to experience this again, and we're going to relieve all the pressure of like all of the things that you're feeling right now. And when I came back from the experience, every part of that was gone. I felt like completely new. Like, you know how like Joe Rogan says, like you hit Control Alt Delete on yourself. That's that's really what it felt like. It felt like I cleaned out all of the cookies that had accrued, you know, through interactions with other people and all the intensity that was happening in my life at that time. And it was just like, okay, we're gonna wipe all that clean and you're good to go. And it came back. And the funny part was shortly after that, and this is why I say like this is why I ask about have you ever been locked out? The next two times that I went back in, which was shortly thereafter, everything was gray. There was no color to anything, and I couldn't get past a certain point. And I just thought, okay, well, I guess that whatever happened on that day that it was so intense, like I emptied out whatever I had, and I don't need to go back in until I conquer my next, you know, part of the lesson plan or whatever it is. But, you know, anything you could speak to on that, maybe?
I mean, that's a very profound and powerful experience. I mean, thanks for sharing it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I really appreciate hearing that.
Yeah, it's I've had many. Um, I'll ask this one last thing. And I got this from the triangle theory that you guys, the triangle theory podcast that you guys were on when you were talking about your ayahuasca experiences, your pharmahuasca experiences. So my first ayahuasca experience was actually a pharmahuasca experience. It was I didn't drink it; it was in capsule form, and it was very intense, the most intense one I've ever had. Because it lasted about 8 hours, which is pretty long for an eye experience. And it was mimosa and Syrian rue. And it was 2009, and it was like I had been asleep my entire life up until that point in time, and it was like I finally awoke. I sometimes I say like my life started at 29. Um, but have you guys found and the reason why I say this is because every time I drank thereafter, I my first four times were Pharmahuasca, and then every other time after that I actually drank the brew. But I never had it seemed like every time I drank it, it was never quite as intense as my Pharmahuasca experiences. Have you guys, what was your experience with both?
I definitely noticed a distinct difference between my pharmahuasca experiences and my actual ayahuasca experiences. Um, the way that I did pharmahuasca primarily was by drinking Syrian root tea, and then after about an hour or two after that, then every half hour, actually vaporizing it and smoking it, and this produced, we were able to extend the experience for as long as the Syrian root tea lasted. And at the time, those were some of the most profound DMT experiences that I had ever had. And I thought that I fully understood what an ayahuasca experience was like from those experiences. When I went down to Iquitos in Peru and actually had traditional ayahuasca brew made from the actual plants in the Amazon, it was a distinctly different experience. And the main difference was that I felt like I was in touch with what people call mother ayahuasca, or
Hmm.
the actual, the entity. I mean, there was a different type of intelligence that I experienced with the pharmahuasca. And when I was down in the Amazon, um, and this was also, I had done some of the Amazonian plants later back in California. So it wasn't just the set and setting of being in the Amazon. There seemed to be something specifically about doing those plants and then, brewed in the way that it was, where, where I felt like I was, you know, in dialogue with this ancient mother goddess type jungle entity that wasn't present during the Pharmahuasca experiences, and then subsequently after about 35 actual ayahuasca experiences, I felt like that mother entity was with me, as a part of me, and subsequent experiences with psilocybin mushrooms, that mother entity came back. So I felt like she sort of, through those experiences that I had in the Amazon, um, she sort of wove herself into my being, so to speak, or I made some kind of contact that didn't happen with the Pharmahuasca experiences I had prior to that.
Hmm. Very interesting. Sarah?
Yeah, I've only ever had ayahuasca on one occasion. It was stateside. It was definitely with a vine that had lineage to Terrence's farm. But honestly, there were so many other factors in that particular experience that I felt like, um, how do I say this? People are people, and the shaman who facilitated my experience had a interpersonal motivation to give me a very small cup. That had nothing to do with me. It had everything to do with an ex-boyfriend being her friend.
Hmm.
And so I only had a very small biochemical window with which to experience her presence. Um, and, that might change someday, and I very much look forward to that. Although I was able to feel that. And in a way, at the time, I could tell that that was just a coincidental mercy because those were not the right people to drink with.
Hmm.
And the following day, they basically tried to peer pressure me into poisoning myself. Good times. Always be careful who you drink with. Always be careful. Don't be peer pressured. Um, but as far as my experience, in contrast with Pharmahuasca, I feel like I definitely encountered some kind of greater living biological force through the Pharmahuasca, and in a way, it felt like the grandmother of ayahuasca, and it definitely felt like a DNA lineage. Um, and so I've had two Pharmahuasca experiences in particular. One of them had not as elegant of a balance between the two catalysts, and so it actually really amped up the experience as opposed to, modulate it. So I ended up in like hyperspace, which is very uncomfortable. Um, and in that experience, I actually had a DMT elf who seemed to recognize me from previous experiences, like pity me and do me a solid and like shield me from the intensity. And not in a shaming way, but be like, hey, like your baggage is actually the friction point here. And I was talking about like, just family baggage, intergenerational trauma, essentially, which we all have on some level. But so I think that there's a lineage and a kinship between these levels of biological intelligence. I had a very similar experience on one of my first heavy acid trips where I went to go visit a beach in rural Northern California, and I could feel the tectonic plate shelf there, and you could see the Milky Way, and it was very much this scalar experience of consciousness where like you're in the presence of Gaia, but then you're in the presence of, the solar system, but then also you could see the band of the Milky Way. And so it's like this direct, scalar line between all of these like mother goddess consciousnesses. And so I felt that similar kind of scaling between what I experienced with ayahuasca, that very Terran um, nature spirit, not necessarily Gaian, but like she's like Gaia's, daughter essentially. And then this sort of overarching DNA consciousness, my pharmaceutical experience had a lot of encountering the phylum, the tree of life,
Hmm.
on a very visceral level, and I think that just like seeing that it's like a holographic web. It's like Indra's net, and so um, I very much look forward to being able to commune with Mama Ayahuasca again. But also, yeah, what it was a mercy. The only thing I saw that night was a beautiful little ectoplasmic butterfly that was basically like, "Shh, you don't want to see more than this right now. These people are crazy." And I was like, "Cool, I believe it."
It's so funny that you say that because Like one day I made a post on Reddit. I've only had ayahuasca experiences by myself in the comfort and safety of my own room with my bathroom right next to my room. Um, and basically what I said is like, is there is there a middle, or I should say, what's the difference between having an ayahuasca experience in the comfort of your own home with yourself versus being in the jungle with a shaman? And I got a whole
I,
slew of different answers on
oh
that.
yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, and some people were like, no, you're actually disgracing the plant and yada yada yada. Other people weighed in were just like, yeah, I'm the same boat as you. I've only done it myself. I had people that worked at retreats chime in like this is like I said, this is kind of like a disgrace to the sacrament. You could never truly navigate these realms without a shaman present and yada yada yada. And I want, and like, I'm not going to get in online arguments on Reddit. I'm too fucking busy. But, um, it's kind of like my general answer was like, there's no middleman to divinity. I don't, if divinity is truly going to touch you and give you some answers and some truth, well, then there's no middleman for that. I feel like facilitators in the Amazon are for people that truly need a facilitator to kind of like guide them through it. But and maybe I'm just stubborn. And I just always
Yeah.
think I can get there myself. I'll find my own way. And I pretty much have. So, I never got a backlash during any sort of Aya trip, and the Aya trips have been the most intense out of anything that I've ever or encountered. And it always made it made psilocybin, mescaline, and LSD seem like child's play and candy in a way. Like just or candy isn't the right word, but like just on such a lower level.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I totally agree with you. A lot of people attach this kind of dogma to their understanding of the ayahuasca experience. And I think the most important thing is trusting your own inner voice and your own relationship that you establish with the intelligence of the ayahuasca. It'll let you know if you're doing something wrong. If it doesn't, I trust its intelligence greater than my own. I mean, I certainly broke many of the rules. I mean, I think that it's of utmost importance that people follow the dietary restrictions and the medical restrictions around it because there are genuine dangers involved in that if one doesn't adhere to those. But I mean, I'll tell you, I've not only had most of my psychedelic or ayahuasca experiences with just one other person or by myself as well. And on my very first experience with traditional ayahuasca, when I was down in the Amazon, I mean, I broke the rule that everybody says is the number one thing you shouldn't do besides the dietary restriction, which is to actually have sex on ayahuasca.
that
You
was
know,
in
and
Dreaming Wide Awake.
yeah, and that to me was an incredibly healing experience for me, and I did not get any kind of feeling from the intelligence of the ayahuasca that I was doing something wrong. It seemed to be encouraging me to do it. So yeah, I think the most important thing is to listen to your own inner voice and to trust the relationship that you establish with the spirit entity yourself.
I agree. I agree. And to say to Sarah, like when you said like humans are humans, yeah, humans are humans and shamans are humans too. And
Exactly. It's
yeah,
so easy and I'm going to take a moment to say this because there was another case just 2.5, 3 weeks ago of someone in the Amazon using their position as a medicine person to sexually abuse the people who were coming to them for ceremony. It's really important to understand that human nature is corruptible and that anytime somebody is going to try to insist on an imposition of a dogmatic system, that there's a motivation behind it. And you have to look at the motivation. Is the motivation because they sincerely want to protect you from things they know can go wrong? Or is it because they want to maintain that expert status and power? not everybody is meant to journey by themselves. Not everybody's meant to journey in general. But I definitely think that it's important for us to understand that just like in any spiritual practice, that there are going to be people who put themselves in that position because they seek power, not because they seek to bring spiritual healing to people. And so you're always going to want to do your homework. You're always going to want to vet people, but you're going to want to do it without the expectation that you're going to be achieving what you want on any kind of timeline. You just kind of have to let, things develop at their own pace. And it's really important for people to work with people who are accountable, work with people who have, third party accountability. And it's important to, like I said, take your time and go slow. The medicine's not going to go anywhere. This is like an ancient intelligence. And, as Ian said from Jurassic Park, life finds a way and the medicine will find you. So don't be in a rush for that. And, there's a reason why I haven't rushed to go out and find ayahuasca in some other fashion, because like my own experience, somebody was projecting onto me that I needed healing. And I didn't. I was just in a shitty relationship. And they were like some half-ass new agey dude who thought that he could fix our dysfunctional relationship, his fault, by sending me to a shaman. And if anything, it really, just like shines the light on the path to healing that doesn't necessarily involve visionary work, because like the work is when you come home. The work isn't sitting there puking in ceremony. That's the hard part, and that's the part a lot of people want their hand held with. Like you could be at home and be puking in your own bathroom. You could be sitting in your own shower. You could be regulating your own body temperature over the shower. I personally like that way because, I am a fragile constitution. That makes a lot more sense than me, trying to put my my safety and my body's ride essentially. Like this is a biochemical ride, and they do have experience, but their experience is with an aggregate of people, right? Whereas like as David is saying, trust your body, trust your own, intuition, trust your relationship with medicine. It'll let you know if you're doing something wrong. um but for me it's like we if we remove all the barriers and just like really tap into ourselves, like we can feel when something's right or we can feel when something's wrong. And I think it's really important for people to like get in touch with trusting themselves before they go into these really deep end experiences. Because sometimes people will take advantage of that lack of trust in our own intuition, especially in metaphysical circles. Yeah.
I think that is the perfect thing to end on. And I agree, and I would just reiterate by saying that if you're going to come into this world and you're going to have an experience, you have to vet um, where you're going to go. Um, and you have to read reviews, everything like that, because humans are humans. And right now, this space is a very, very lucrative space for some people that would love to take thousands of dollars from you to come down to the Amazon and sit there for a week or whatever. It's funny, like we could go off on people projecting and saying you should do this and everything. That's for another time. Um, but David, Sarah, I thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking time out of your schedule to sit with some curious guy uh, about these things and an experiencer and explorer just like yourselves to, get together and ask some questions and come up with some answers. I hope we get to do this again at some point. Do you have any closing thoughts? Either of
I'm
No,
you?
just
just,
gratitude. Thank you. It was a great conversation.
Yeah, I love
yeah,
these conversations. I live for them. This is where I live. This is where my head lives in these spaces. So,
yeah, you asked some really great questions. I really thought that you shared a lot of wonderful information too. So this was a great pleasure, and I would love to do it sometime again with you. So thank you very much as well.
right on.
Hmm.
Thank you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm gonna stop recording.